The reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasure of Egypt.
Hallelujah.
And great was the treasure of Egypt. It wasn't just something menial. I mean, we still today see the monuments and the things left over from that great empire. The great empire that God Himself crippled. Esteeming the approach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for He looked to the what? Reward. By faith He forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for He endured as seeing Him who is invisible. See, again, he counted those things as greater because He looked to the reward. And what is our reward? Christ Himself.
Hallelujah.
To be with Him forever in heaven. And whenever you look at it that way, it's like seeing that everything that we experience in our life is nothing compared to being with the Lord forever. By faith He forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for He endured as seeing Him who is invisible. By faith He kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, lest He who destroys the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempted to do so, were drowned.
Hallelujah.
See, Moses found the place in which he needed to be. I've said this before a few Sundays back, but Moses is truly a case study of somebody who was looking to find themselves. A person who had an identity that needed to find truly who Moses was. Raised as a prince of Egypt. Rejecting those things and even attempting to deliver a Hebrew slave, he kills an Egyptian. He hides in the desert. He goes on a tour of finding himself. And God shows up and calls him and gives him purpose and a point for his life. Moses found the place where he needed to be. And even though it was a place where all around him the world was falling apart, even though it was a place where it seemed to be turbulent and at times even his own people were against him, he found the place where he needed to be in his life, serving God with everything that he had. Are you in that place this morning? In that place where we're sheltered from this world, sheltered from the judgments and the plagues that come. So how do we go to that place? I'm glad you asked. Somebody asked. Well, we just got a live bunch here this morning. Then we need to serve coffee in the lobby. How did Moses get to that place? We see that, or what we can look at is how he lived. What did he live for? He lived for the will of God. He lived for the glory of God. So number one, how do we get to that place to where we need to be in our life? We need to ask ourselves, what am I living for? What are you living for this morning? Are you living for the will of God? Are you living for the glory of God? That's how you find where you need to be, to live for the will of God.
That's right.
And we see, according to these verses, that he was willing to separate himself from the world. He was willing to separate himself from Pharaoh's house to do those things. The other thing is he was willing to endure suffering. Living for the Lord is not always an easy thing to do. In fact, the Scripture promises tribulation, persecution, but also that the Scripture promises blessing. He looked to the reward. And even in this life, if it became the worst that it ever was, if we was to serve the Lord with everything in our life and it became worse and worse and we were never blessed in this life, if we were never felt the presence of God, if we never received a sign that God was with us, if everything became worse and worse, still the reward would be greater than all those things. Because the fact is, we should live for the glory of God because He made us.
Yes.
He's our Father. He's our Creator. We should live for Him. And so He was willing to endure suffering, looking towards the reward of heaven. Looking towards the reward of being with God. See, Moses was never the same after he encountered the burning bush and he saw God. Did you notice that? How God changed him in such a way. And it wasn't just because of on TV where his beard changed colors. That's not the kind of changes I'm talking about. Though the scripture does say when he spent time with the Lord that his face shone, that he had to veil it because everybody was looking. So he knew the glory of God, and that was what he lived for, was to live for God and to be with Him. Whenever you think about different ones in the scripture, you see Moses had such a desire to seek the Lord and to see the Lord face to face. And guess what? He's now seeing the Lord face to face. He got his reward. He got his goal, his desire, which was to see the Lord, to be with Him. He experienced the satisfaction of finding and living for the purpose of God. You ever notice whenever you're not living for the Lord, there's no purpose for living? It seemed as if a lot of the purposes don't seem to have a lot of weight. And a lot of those things that seem cool aren't as cool as you thought. It's kind of like the movie that you've looked forward to coming out, and you've heard the advertisement, and you have all the anticipation, and you go and you see it, and you're just like, what's that?
Yeah.
Seems all cool at the beginning, but in the end, the scripture says it all leads to death. But not so with living for Jesus. In fact, it seems the opposite. It seems at times as if what you're living for and who you're living for, with the things that you're experiencing, it doesn't seem as if the reward is going to be what it is. The fanfare isn't quite as great, but the reward is the greatest.
Hallelujah.
See, the cross didn't look like a big fanfare. They weren't having a big party. It looked like a big defeat. It looked like suffering. It looked like agony, because it was. And so when Jesus says, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, there is an agony and there's a suffering, but then there's a resurrection and a great reward.
Hallelujah.
Life from death. Romans 12 says this. Before I read it.